Hey guys, I wasn't intending to go too crazy on this video, but I went pretty crazy on this video and got pretty in-depth in a lot of details. If you're not into that kind of thing, you may not like the video. If you just want a brief overview of the update, there's probably some better channels. But if you like going into the weeds a little bit, then this video definitely goes there. I liked the update. I like the direction they're going with combat. I will make that abundantly clear, I think, by the end of this video. But I can also see where some people had some problems with it, and I kind of try to address that as well later on in the video. A lot of the obsessive details are more towards the end, so you'll have to watch until the end to see a lot of that. Anyways, let's get into it, guys. The September live stream for Ashes of Creation was yet another great live stream. However, I do think this is the first live stream this year that had a decent percentage in the community that are not happy with it. The action combat fans, I think, have some issues with this update, but I personally loved it, and it clarified for me what they mean by hybrid combat. To me, Intrepid so far appears to be leaning heavily towards Guild Wars 2 when they talk about hybrid combat, which I view to be a great thing as I love Guild Wars 2 combat. Also, I think this update clears up another question I had to some extent, and that is, will the PvE be good? Because a lot of PvP-focused MMOs have very uninspired and boring PvE gameplay. But even with the low-level mobs we saw having multiple unique abilities, I think it is a good indication we could see engaging PvE fights. I will get into a lot more detail on the mob abilities later on. Now, I think it is still too early to make broad sweeping decisions on combat. This is far from the final combat form. Again, we only saw a few abilities and they had no cooldowns and nearly infinite range. Damage numbers are likely skewed by Steven having great gear, and he mentioned the mobs were weak to his damage type. And damage balancing, I am sure, is not a consideration yet at all. I will address the concerns I have seen regarding the lack of action that some people have later on as well. I'm not going to cover every single aspect of this update, as most of the rest of the update was not that interesting, and it could make this video crazy long, as it will probably be quite long as it is. The highlights of the video were the combat, the Minotaur mobs and their abilities, the UI updates, and the reveal of the Alpha 2 dungeon, the Tower of Carfin. This dungeon, it appears, might be hovering above the ground, and it looks fantastic. They mention it has a heavy story element and a quest chain that accompanies this dungeon. Steven mentions that this will be a very fun tower that many groups will exist within and fight, so clearly it is an open world dungeon. Which makes sense considering the size of the dungeon and the prominence of it in the open world. Next, I want to talk about the UI. I love the minimalistic UI design. It looks fantastic. The compass above the minimap is a nice touch. The character and target frames are drastically improved from Alpha 1. The way health is removed from the health bars when damage is taken is very nice, and I especially liked the zone change message. Next up, the NPCs that Steven fought. He fought 3 different NPCs that were the Minotaur mob type and their hound minions. These were all level 15 mobs, and Steven was level 10. These mobs were the Terror Gore Raincrawler, which is a shaman-based Minotaur that had 2000 HP. A guard Drudger that was described as a reptilian dog and had 800 HP. And a Terror Gore Warhorn, another Minotaur that had 2400 HP. The Terror Gore Raincrawler is a shaman that has water-based abilities. It had a ranged ability that had a somewhat slow projectile that would home onto its target. This ability did roughly 63 damage. The Raincrawler also had a shield self-buff ability that seems to reduce damage taken. Here you can see the Ranger Snipe ability, which normally does 1148 damage. Here it did 546 damage instead with the shield buff active. I did catch a time where this ability also affected the Hound companion as well. Pretty cool little touch, I think. Then we had the Terror Gore Warhorn. This Minotaur had a heal that seemed to do 2 ticks of healing and heal for 333 health. The Warhorn also had a charge, but I never caught the damage of it as Steven had 1 health when he was charged. Next we had the Guard Drudger, which I did not notice any special abilities. And as I said before, it is nice to see these low-level mobs have a fair amount of abilities. The more mob variety, the better. Now we get onto the Ranger itself. First, a couple of details before we get into the 2 different bow types and some details of them. First, we see Steven climb this little hill, which is something that they showcased during the UE5 showcase, some parkour options being available. Not combat related, but cool to see that in-game and working. Next, players can shoot while moving and jumping. I find this to be a good move and something I prefer, as being rooted when spamming basic attacks I have never liked. One of the abilities showcased, Snipe, does root, but it comes with the trade-off of high damage, so I am okay with that. Next we do have projectile collision in the game and working. This is something they talked about in the past, and it is good to see it in game. I have found two examples of this. One is when an arrow hits a tree when Steven is using the longbow basic attack. Notice how the impact sound changes, which is a very nice little intricacy that I find to be a great touch. You will also notice the mob not taking damage from this particular attack, so clearly projectile collision is working properly. Another example is when Steven was fighting a mob over the crest of a hill using the short bow, and you see a basic attack that does not register any damage because of the hill blocking the projectile. I find projectile collision to be a nice feature in combat, and one that was present in Guild Wars 2. This can set up some interesting situations in PvP where a player can stand behind a friendly target and use projectile collision to their advantage. This in and of itself makes tanks more valuable in combat if this projectile collision works in that manner. We know it works that way with terrain, but we might have to wait until Alpha 2 to see if body blocking projectiles will be an option in PvP to save a friendly target. I hope so, as it makes combat more dynamic, and to me, it gives combat more of an action feel. Action combat to me is a lot more than just how one aims a skill. Things like projectile collision and body blocking also give an action feel. And active blocking can be thrown in there, especially with projectile collision being a thing. Next, let's talk about the two weapons showcased, the longbow and the shortbow. The longbow is a weapon that has slower attack speeds, but does more base damage per shot. The basic attacks seem to root the player a little bit on the longbow, whereas the shortbow does not slow down the player at all. The longbow basic attack can also be charged for more damage. Fair warning, the damage numbers, attack speeds, and charge times that I am about to mention are all very rough estimates, as I was trying to watch the timestamps on YouTube and get a feel for how long the attacks took. And the damage numbers are all very likely placeholder, as I am sure balance is not something they have gotten to in any way yet. I compared using the Warhorn mobs for damage comparison between the two weapons, as the Warhorn did not have the damage reduction buff like the Raincaller, and the damage numbers did seem to vary slightly between some of the mobs. But with the longbow, the attack speed for normal non-charge attacks seems to be about 1 second. The non-crit damage for non-charged attacks was roughly 260, and the crit damage for non-charged was roughly 605. Here you can see 3 successive non-charged attacks on a Warhorn mob and the total time it takes to complete all 3 attacks. You see 2 non-crit and 1 crit damage of 605. For the charged attacks, the time to fully charge seems to be roughly 1 second. Here's a clip showing a fully charged attack, the time it takes to complete, and the non-crit damage. It takes about 1 second and does 205 non-crit damage. Here's a fully charged longbow attack that crits for 680 damage. The shortbow has a much faster attack speed and does not slow down the player much at all. The shortbow does not have a charged attack, but it does have a much faster attack speed. I estimate that the shortbow is able to do 3 attacks in 1 second. But this, again, is a very rough estimate. Each shortbow attack hits for 213 damage non-crit and 349 crit. I'm showing a clip with 3 basic attacks in 1 second on the shortbow, and each hitting with non-crit damage of 213. And here you can see the crit damage of the shortbow basic attack of 349. Again, all these damage numbers are placeholder, but that being said, the DPS of the shortbow does seem much higher than the longbow because of the much faster attack speed. But as I said, I wouldn't read too much into that right now as they haven't done any balancing yet. Now we get into the 3 abilities in this showcase. First, we have Quick Shot. This is an ability that has 3 charges, and each shot does more damage than the previous as it applies a stacking debuff. This ability has 3 charges, and each of which has its own cooldown. The abilities in this demonstration all had 3-second cooldowns and very long ranges, which again is either placeholder or due to some God mode settings. Here you can see the time it takes to complete the entire 3 charges of Quick Shot, again on a Warcaller mob for consistency. Each of these is non-crit, so you can clearly see the damage increase with each hit. I only saw a few crits with Quick Shot, and it of course depends on which part of the chain the crit lands and how much damage it does. The next ability is Snipe. This ability has a charge time and roots the character in place, similar to the longbow charge time. Max charging this gave a damage of 1039 against the same Warhorn mob, and I never saw crits for this. Max charge seems to take 2.5 to 3 seconds. Finally, we have the one action ability that was showcased, Airstrike. This ability launches your character in the air in the direction you are facing and vaults you forward. You launch 3 projectiles down in a line in front of you. When they impact, they do AoE damage and root targets in place. This was a long animation, taking nearly 3 seconds to complete and doing 474 damage with the root effect. This is very much an action ability and seemed very much to operate the same way in both the action and tab camera. The other 2 abilities are very much tab abilities that require a target. They did mention this, but you can also see when Steven is in action mode, the first 2 abilities gray out when he does not have either a soft lock target or a hard lock target, and become solid when he does have a target. And they also reference that soft lock targets will not require aiming, you just have to be in the general vicinity. Here you can see that Steven is clearly not aiming at the target, but his cursor is close enough to still have a soft lock target, and so his arrow still hits. Which is one of the reasons why the action camera doesn't seem to have any benefit really. The one benefit he did mention of this is that in large scale PvP it can make targeting easier. Another benefit that he mentioned that I am unsure of is the ability to free fire and hit a target that comes into range of your ability. This is probably a 1 in 1000 type of situation, and in large scale situations I think free firing your abilities might be a challenge because it seemed that acquiring a soft lock target had a pretty large range. So you're oftentimes, I think, going to try to free fire and instead mouse close enough to a target to soft lock that target. So all in all, while I am really excited and happy about the direction of combat because of how closely it resembles Guild Wars 2, my main question that is unanswered is why there is even a reticle in the first place. It seems to not really serve a purpose. Are there action skills that actually require the use of the reticle, or is it just for targeting only? Steven very often mentions template attacks when he talks about action abilities. To me, he is referencing ground targeting abilities that have a template on the ground showing where the ability will land. Similar to a Mage Blizzard spell in World of Warcraft, that is what I would call a template skill. Where all the skills in WildStar were essentially template skills. Guild Wars 2 makes heavy use of template skills. Are all action abilities template skills, or are there some skills that require reticle aim? This is a big question still left unanswered, in my opinion. My preference is template, as I have said in the past. Steven mentioned this game is more tab than action, and that definitely seems to be the case. But I also want to reiterate, tab does not mean no action. It is very possible to have a lot of action in a tab target game. Guild Wars 2 is a perfect example of that. And that is where I will end this one. Again, I went a little above and beyond with the research, editing, and scripting of this video. As a result, I will be pushing back my next video to 2 weeks from now. That is going to be another big one with a ton of research and comparisons to other MMOs. And it is another topic regarding MMOs that I find fascinating, MMO economies. Ashes of Creation is set up to have a fantastic economy that I am excited to really dig into for this video, and especially once we get to play this MMO. Also, I have not plugged my Discord much, but consider joining if you are one that likes to get really in-depth with research, spreadsheets, builds, and guides. I will be doing that in spades once Alpha 2 launches, and would love to have some help with research and data collection. And hey, we could have normal conversations as well if you want. The link is in the description. With that, if you liked the video, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next video. Also, for those that fell asleep, here's a wake-up call for you. Peace.